so excited to talk to Stan Truong. He was our winner of the Beans Battle of the Audience Favorite. Stan, you there?
Yes. Good morning, Terry.
Good morning. I'm so glad you agreed to talk to us. So,
thank you.
Stan, I don't. You know what? It's funny. I don't have your bio, but you are a history teacher, and I mentioned that because that related so much to your story. And the mission was, the theme was on a mission. Do you want to talk, just to give us a little, like 2-3 sentence sum of your story, your winning story?
It was about 25 years ago. I was student teaching, and I had an experience with my student teaching mentor and some Vietnam veterans that he had invited to our class, where he made a pretty insensitive comment. But then the following year, I was a full-time teacher and met those same veterans in my classroom this time, and they gave me some words of encouragement, and it just made everything better. It was a beautiful experience.
I love that. I think that's why people really responded to your story at the Slam. Yeah. And we did a combination of judging, like we had 3 judges, and also we had audience vote again to sort of add it in. I think that's why people responded so much to that, because I think it's, whenever I go to a Slam or I look at it, I always think, there's the story, what it's about, which you just described, and then what it's really about that people relate to. And I think your story, what it's really about, I don't know, you may feel differently, but sort of, owning who you are, embracing your identity and being proud of that. And I think, whether you have a Vietnamese background or not, I think that's something everyone can relate to.
Yes, I totally agree. And I think that for me, when I go to story slams or hear a good story, that the emotional connection, whether it's belonging or perseverance or what have you, I like those stories the best.
I agree. I think, it's like sometimes when I do storytelling workshops, I always use the story Rocky. I mean, the movie Rocky from Philadelphia, it's a movie about boxing. People love it. I'm never going to box. And in its simple plot, it's a story about boxing. But what is it really about? It's about, someone who refuses to give up. And that's why I think it's so beloved. So I agree with you. Those underlining universal themes, belonging, and, standing up for yourself, embracing who you are, I think those are the ones that really resonate with audiences. And sometimes if you could do that with a little humor like you did in your story, I think that's always a winning combination. But I'm talking too much. Tell me how you got interested in storytelling.
It was in the summer of 2010, I discovered podcasts, and they became a big part of my life. And I stumbled onto the Moth podcast, which is pretty renowned. And I didn't make it to a stage until 2017. I was actually with another local storyteller / teacher that Steve Kernahan. We went to a stage off of South Street. I was really nervous, and I eventually got on and had a good night. So that was really encouraging.
And I'm just running, and so people who don't know, the Moth is a big storytelling organization. They have like chapters in lots of different cities. I think they have one in Philadelphia still, where they do a slam just like we do. It's just like us. So, except, we're local. They don't come out to Westchester. What else? I'm just wondering, what else do you think? I know you said stories you like the best, but what else do you think makes a good story?
Good stories to me, it's funny you mentioned Rocky, and you wouldn't never, you're not a boxer yourself. I think good stories talk about either something very relatable, like we've all been there, or we could, we know that experience very well, or sometimes it's something unique, and either way, it pulls you in because there's something about it that the storyteller is giving as far as their perspective that just makes you lean forward. Yes. So for me, a good story is that thing of, it could be about going to the supermarket, or it could be about, I've listened to someone run like an ultra marathon. Like, that's not something I'm ever going to try, but their emotions and thoughts and decision making around it, just you lean forward, and then you lean back saying, yeah, that makes sense. And I could totally, I can totally see myself there or understand why that happened. And everyone feels closer in the room. So.
I totally agree. I always say you can write a story. It's funny you mentioned the supermarket because I've often said, you could tell a story about going to the supermarket and it could be like, shopping for Thanksgiving and it could be the most emotional thing ever.
Yeah.
But the other thing that I think you're saying a lot, which I love that you're hitting on, is authenticity. The authenticity of the storyteller. And I think that's something you really brought to it. Like no one else there had your background, and it's that authenticity of who you are. And this is for anyone who wants to tell a story, bring who you are. I think people really respond to that.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Go
ahead.
Being a teacher for this long, I guess I stumbled onto the fact that when I am my authentic self to my students, there's a good response there. So I got some good feedback in that way. And then in my personal life, I love connecting with people. So yeah, being authentic, I guess the practice or the event of a story slam is so unique. It's strangers in a room and someone decides to share, and then there's something very vulnerable about that and authentic about that I think everyone just kind of, it's kind of something that people would, I don't know what the word is, relate, but
it's a community.
Yeah, community. That's what it is.
Yeah, that's what I love about Story Slam. Just exactly what you're saying. You have, I'd love to hear more about what you love about it, but I think I don't know any other place you have people, different ages, different races, different backgrounds, and they come together and they reveal themselves. And I think it makes people feel connected. And that's why I think people just keep coming back to it. I like you said, so it sounds like you went to your first one in 2017, and then it sounds like, I know I've seen you there before a bunch of times. So I think it becomes part of people's lives in a way, that sort of, that community, that connection, the idea that when you're listening to people's stories, we're all kind of the same deep down. We all want the same things.
I think storytelling is I think everyone's been listening to stories since they were children, right? So there's something very familiar with it. But then I don't want to say the stakes, but the setting of that is so different and unique. To have someone volunteer to do that is really special. I think it's different than like an open mic comedy thing and open mic music, because the crowds at Story Slams are so incredibly supportive. They all want you to do well. And I think people who are nervous about that should keep, just understand that everyone is really there to like have a good time and hope that you do well.
Well, you bring up a good point. Like, what if someone is listening and they're thinking like, oh, I would love to go, or I've been to a Story Slams a bunch of times, but I've never told a story. What kind of advice could you give them about telling your first one? How you prepared, if you prepared at all, that kind of thing.
So the 2017 one, I prepared. I typed up and had my story written out. I'm that kind of a, preparation when it comes to storytelling. Mm-hmm. And when I got to the show, I planned to put my name on. And when I got to the actual paper, I chickened out. I was like, nah, I can't do this. So Steve spoke, and I was kind of sitting to the side, just thinking about how I should have. And then at intermission, the host said they still needed storytellers. And she spoke to me directly and found out that I had interest, and she kind of nudged me. And then I spoke, and I actually won that night. So that was a great sort of entry. Uh-huh. But as far as preparation, I'm someone who likes to write out, like, everything you hear me say on stage. I wrote probably 98% of it out, because that process for me helps me cut down on a lot of tangents I would have gone on. And the one I told Thursday started off focused in a different space in some ways and ended up where I wanted it to be. So that came with time. So that's my process.
Well, I actually have a similar process. I like to write out my stories as well, because I think, you're talking about something that happened in your past. And I think, I don't know if you find this, but the act of writing it triggers more details.
Yes.
So it helps create the story. It brings more things to light.
Exactly. And there's ways that I can, I don't know, make that connection or give those perspectives. In sometimes I need less words sometimes than I originally put down, and just writing it out lets me see it and edit it and cut it down. And for the last one, it was big. Had other things I was trying to say at the beginning, other jokes I was going to say, and I'm happy with where it ended up. So.
But to be clear, I want to make this clear for people reading. No one is, you are not memorized. If you're writing down 600 words, you're not memorizing 600 words, right? It's not about memorizing a speech.
No. I use the story, I use those words as like my track to stay on, and then I read the crowd. And like, for example, the surprise word we had.
Yes.
I had to put that in, and that was part of it. And then sometimes the crowd responds in a way, and you just have to make a very natural comment about what happened. So, yeah, it's not a speech.
Right.
It's not a speech at all, but it's a story. And I'm just someone who likes to really be intentional with what I'm trying to say when I'm up there. Those are my favorite stories that just have it. They move, they're very efficient, and they kind of get you to a place.
Well, I think, yeah, that's right. And what you're talking about when you say those are your favorite stories, the ones that are well crafted, the ones that like the storyteller's like, I'm going to really craft this out. And I like the way that you put it. It's like kind of a roadmap to keep you on track, but it's not memorizing it. But the act of writing it triggers memories, triggers other ideas as you're thinking about what you want to say. And it's also interesting. I find this, and it sounds like this happens too. You think your story is about one thing, and you're writing what happened, and then you realize it's actually about something else.
It's such a, I guess, because it's all of our past experiences we're writing about. It's really fun. It's just fun to go, it just frames it differently than maybe I had in my mind for many years. So, and for example, my story last Thursday, having a student teacher last fall added something to a story that was over 2 decades old. You see sort of, you look at it again and reframe it, and it still stays alive in some ways in your mind. I meant to ask you, I don't know if I interrupt you here, but
go ahead.
How did you get into storytelling and hosting the events that I love?
Well, did you ever go to Jim Breslin's Story Slam in Westchester?
Yeah, I was at the last one before COVID.
Well, years ago, and I think it was like 15 years ago, I was doing a lot of writing back then, and this is kind of a funny story. And I saw like this is how ancient it was. I saw in Starbucks something that said Story Slams, whatever, and I pulled it off. And Patrick Carmody, who does all the stories, and so I'm friends with him. I said, "Hey, Pat, is this something you think you might be interested in?" And he's like, "Yes." And we show up, and it's Ryan's Pub, and Pat tells the stories first night, and he wins, of course. And as it turns out, Jim and I both had, I didn't know him well at all, but we realized we both were at QVC at the same time, working there. And we both like to write. So I became very involved with that. And then a few months later, I told my first story. I remembered it was Valentine's Day in February, like 15, 16 years ago. And I won that my first time. And it's definitely like a high. There's no way around it. Like, it's a high. And especially, if you're telling a funny story and people are laughing, it feels great. And
it feels great. And
I became really kind of addicted to it. And also because I was writing a lot, it was a natural thing. And, you're a history teacher, so even, history itself lends itself to telling stories to students.
Yeah.
So it really, captured my attention. And so I really would, Jim and I started doing storytelling workshops together. And through there, I met Luann as well. And then she and I became friends, and she and I did Listen to Your Mother, which is a storytelling event in Wilmington, Delaware. And we became close. And then I think it was like 10 years that Jim was running it, and he was like, I'm done. He was like, I had enough. I'm done. Because he was at his height. He was doing Westchester Story Slam. He was running Lancaster, one in Delco. I mean, he had like an empire of story things. So he was done. And Luann and I were like, you know what? We're not done. We are not done. So we set up our own storytelling event called 10 Stories. And I think we got maybe 6 or 7 months in, and then COVID happened. And then that stopped it. And then, life. And then it was only around like this time last year that we said, you know what? We think we'd like to bring this back. And so with Kevin, that's how we did it. But like you, I love the community. I love that there's a saying, like, there's no one you can't love once you know their story.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, like, that resonates with me because I tend to tell stories that are pretty, I guess, revealing and like emotional. But Thursday night, there were so many people who came up to me separately and just needed to felt like they needed to share with me their relationship to the Vietnam War or teaching or something. And I don't know, that's pretty cool these days with how separate we are, that people just felt prompted to just like speak to me, about what I said. It's
unbelievably cool. It's like, you nailed it. Like, we're so divided. And, when people tell stories, it just shows we're all the same. We all want the same thing, to be loved, to be known, to feel like our lives matter in some way. Those are the universal themes, I think. And if you could do that in an entertaining way, and I don't mean like jokey, but just in a way that, tells a story that stays on a roadmap, like you said. That is, not meandering, little humor. I always think that's the winning combination. You have kids, right?
Yes.
Have they seen your stories? What do they think?
I've shown them some, depending on the content, but it's funny. They know I teach history, and my daughter, who's going into middle school for years, before bed, putting her down, she'll ask me, Daddy, tell me a story. And sometimes I'm just really tired, so I'm like, I don't have one. But sometimes I tell her just little anecdotes from my life, or I edit some really fun ones that I've had in my life, and she always finds those really interesting. So I think it's a sweet thing I have with my daughter right now. My son prefers that I edit and remix the books I'm reading to him to make them funny. That's not really storytelling. That's just kind of like on the fly.
Well, it's creative. It exercises that muscle. Sometimes,
but my kids like stories. Yeah.
Sometimes people say to me, "How do you find stories in your life? Like, how do you know what makes a good story?" And I'm going to tell you what I say, but I'm curious since you've been doing a lot of storytelling, how you find them. But I always say to people, there's moments in your life that you don't forget. And if I say to the average person, what'd you have for lunch, 2 weeks ago, they're not going to remember. But if I say, what was your, the first time, you felt like truly a grown up, or the first time you stood up for yourself, or, the first time you felt really scared, or whatever memories you have of incidences that happened in your life, you remember them for a reason. And even if you're not sure what that reason is, they mean something to you that you can't forget them. So I always say, like, sort of excavate your own mind. Like, why was that fight with your parents? So what do you think about that? Like, what did it really mean, right? Was it the first time you stood up for them, or maybe the first time you realized they're human and they're fallible? So I always try to, like, excavate my own memories, that, like, what was it about that I'm still remembering it all these years later? But
wow, I love the way you put that, because I think it's describing something I've tried to explain myself, but not as well as you just did with. Yeah, I think people sometimes want like a specific moment, and that's a anecdote, not a story. And then if you do the excavation, like you said, it does reveal a lot of build-up and post-event that ends up being a story a lot of times, and like for oftentimes my stories, I do a little bit of a lead up, or sometimes I jump right into the action. But, the story itself is sometimes 3 sentences, or the event is like a 3-sentence description, but the response and the lead up to it can be, where you get a lot of the pulling into the audience. So yeah, I love that.
Exactly. That, I wish people knew that. That, because that is exactly, because I see people go up there and they tell these anecdotes. And I think that's a funny anecdote. It's an interesting anecdote. But what did it mean to you? Why are you still talking about it? Right?
Yes.
Like, it meant, and that's the part that makes it, because a good story, all your favorite movies, all your favorite books, your kids' books, it's about a journey, right? You start in one place and you end in another. And it could be at the smallest realization. And, like in your story, the smallest, the way you told it was like, I've come full circle, right? I'm now mentoring someone like me. I've, in a way, I've arrived, right? And sometimes I watch stories and I'm like, oh, like,
you had a chance. There's a window there. You could have done something, and people kind of miss it sometimes.
I know. And I sit there, I'm like, oh, you had the essence. I mean, you just needed to, like, why was this, so important to you? Was it like the first time you were away from home or, but that's exactly right. It's not just the antidote. The antidote happened and you felt what, or you learned what about yourself. So.
Yeah. And I'm always thinking through, I'm often thinking through interesting events that happened in my life that are like, that was cool, that was interesting, but I'm like, I'm not sure if that's a story yet. And it might reveal itself to me as I go through life or think about it more, but everyone's had things happen to them. But I think the magic part is kind of framing it from that storyteller's perspective that makes it a story. And excavation, I like that idea. I think I'm kind of touched on this a little bit with like my kids, but as I said in my story, I'm first generation, so I think I've always been interested in like my parents' story, where they came from, how they got here, and that just made me interested in other people and how they got to where they are too. So I think that's kind of, if you go to storytelling, story slams, I think for the most part you enjoy learning about people.
I agree, and I just wanted to say one thing when you talk about excavating. That's where I find the act of writing it down. I think there's a magic there that helps you excavate your mind, because other things will pop up as you're writing it. And then I think if you continue writing out the story, and then I thought this, like, it'll emerge, I think, the real meaning as things pop up in your conscious as you're writing it down.
That's absolutely true. Like last Thursday, I think it worked out with the magic word, but also when I spoke Vietnamese, for, weeks had been writing about that part, but I was planning to say it in English. Like my mom would tell me this and say it in English. And then I realized I speak some Vietnamese. I was like, I think this would pull the story in, and people would, lean a little more forward if I gave them a little mystery. And so I actually called my dad that day just to make sure I was saying it in the right way exactly. And he gave me that. And I shared my story with my parents afterwards, and they were very proud. So.
Well, you're going to have a video. Did you send them the video? Yeah.
Yeah, sent them the video. They were like, they were very pleased.
Well, also, what you're talking about when you said it in Vietnamese, that's the whole authenticity angle, too, that it really brings it home. Oh, this is... Yeah,
it was awesome. It was really fun. I mean, speaking... For a lot of first-generation kids, speaking their parents' language is, a source of pride or a source of sometimes shame if you can't. So for me to get in front of a mic, in front of a bunch of people who I'm looking around, I don't think there are any other Vietnamese people in the room who spoke Vietnamese. Right. For me to share that was, for me, like personally, very cool.
And I just want to point out, I had one of your students came in, and she didn't have a ticket. She bought one at the door, and I was like, I'm really sorry. Because we were so sold out. I'm like, I don't really have a seat for you. Like, there's no more chairs. And she was like, I don't care. She's like, I'll stand. I'm young. I'm going to stand. I just want you to know one of your students stood for 2 hours for you to listen to your story.
Oh, yeah. She's a great kid. She's a storyteller. She writes poetry. She writes music, and she's a college student now. And that was really sweet. That was really touching. Yeah.
So, am I going to see you on September 17th, or is that the beginning of the school year? That's our next slam.
Beginning of the school year, I don't know. What's the school days you said?
School days. There should be a layup for you. School days. You want Kernahan.
I don't, right. That's a maybe for me, but I'm definitely in for the
Grand Slam.
Big one.
Yeah,
the Grand Slam November.
I can't wait. We're still working on that now. We're trying to pick a venue that is big enough so that we don't have to turn anyone away. So that's.
But I want to thank you. I want to thank you and the team. You guys put on a great event. I'm watching you last Thursday pull out chairs for people. You're hosting. You're speaking. You're doing all these great things, and you make it such a nice event for everyone.
Oh, thank you. We love doing it, and congratulations on your win, and thank you for speaking with us this morning. I know you got some school stuff coming up right now.
Yeah, it's happening in like 20 minutes. So thank you.
Well, Stan,
yeah, I'll see you on stage next time. Thank you very much, Terry.
All right. I'll see you later.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.